Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Launch and Learn, where we are going to discuss everything about mass notification systems. This is a pretty new thing, a pretty new feat for rAVe and for Launch, because as I'm sure a lot of you are noticing, security and AV were kind of becoming like this. And this was kind of our answer to that. I think a lot of you integrators, if you're watching, you're probably watching this because you're thinking, I'm probably going to have to spec a mass notification system in the next year. And you're probably right. So I'm really excited to get into it and talk about this today because we're also learning a lot about security here at rAVe as we're covering more and more of it every year, it seems. And just really quick plug, we actually started a security newsletter that is covering all of the security news that should be things that you guys want to know about in AV or traditional security. If you're interested in learning a little bit more of the AV side, we've got some of that in that newsletter too. So if you are interested in subscribing, it goes out once a month on the 15th. Go to ravepubs.com and subscribe. Highly recommend. Let's kind of get into it really quick. I want to quickly give a really big shout out to today's sponsor, Mimo Monitors. They are incredible for sponsoring this, and we are so grateful. We also have some polls going on today, so please be sure to fill those out. You will get 1 point for each poll question answered, and we will pick 2 random winners from the poll questions to each receive a $20 Amazon gift card, courtesy of rAVe. So, our panelists joining us today is George Meglio from CTI and Scott Lord from Electronic Contracting Company. Welcome, you guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. Of course. So, first things first, do you guys want to each just quickly introduce yourselves a little bit more and about your background in both security and AV? George, do you want to go first?
Sure. George Maglio, work for Conference Technologies out of St. Louis, Missouri. I'm a branch manager here in the New York metro area. Been in the AV space for 35 plus years, and every day learning more about security. And, 10 years ago it was about IT. Now it's about security. So we just keep on evolving. And so very excited. I appreciate you asking me to be here today. Thank you.
Scott, what about you?
I've been in the security life safety industry for about 25 years, based out of the Kansas City metro area. So actually started working on mass notification in the late 2000s. And went back to my school to get my fire science degree to learn more about it. So mass notification's been a passion for mine, as well as school security with the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools.
Very cool. So let's just kind of start really high level here. So let's think about emerging technologies that are becoming more of a big deal in Pro AV, things like AI, IoT, cloud computing. These have potential to transform mass notification systems. So, what can we anticipate about these very forward thinking technologies becoming part of mass notification and therefore becoming part of Pro AV? And that's for whoever wants to take that. Y'all can duke it out.
Go ahead, Scott, jump in.
Okay. Well, I think what we're seeing, definitely is there's a trend of, our IoT type devices and technology that's kind of coming out of the woodwork and applying some of that technology to life safety because of the security issues that we've had. So it is going to be out there and we're going to have to deal with it. I think the key that I'm seeing is making sure that we are appropriately using that technology. So I know one of your questions was about the layers of mass notification and just making sure that as you're looking at the technologies, a lot of the stuff that is IP based and AI based, that technology really just kind of fits a layer. It doesn't really fit into the mass notification components as you see them from a code perspective. So that's probably one of the biggest things that I see, is that there's a lot of great technology out there to be able to assist customers in making sure that we are getting them the information that they need, but making sure that we also understand that a large part of that is that information getting to the people that it's supposed to be getting to.
Right.
considering the technology mechanism that we're using from the IP perspective. George, you do a lot of work on it. What do you think?
Well, I think the buzzword right now is AI, right? Everyone's talking AI, AI. I think the AI technology is a big benefit, right? There's new cameras. There's a security company called Athena Security, where they're using chips that recognize guns or hands up and other items like that. We've seen it in some security and retail security as well. The key here is notification and timing, right? Timing is the one thing that hurts us. The lack of notification and timing is critical to saving lives. So in this case, AI is a big benefit, right? Because it can early recognize a threat, and then, of course, then through mass notification, properly share that information, which is complicated. And we're used to our AV networks per se, and they need to expand in a big way to share notification. And that's the big thing. But AI should be a great help to us. It really will be a nice tool to have, for schools and such.
Yeah. I can definitely see how the one like recognizing like the technology that can potentially recognize someone holding a weapon could be a really big help, particularly in schools. I mean, we're seeing more school shootings like every day. So I think like, George, you and I were talking about this, that it's AV, we can't really like, maybe we can't make school shootings not happen, but we can definitely help protect schools as they are now.
100%. Yep. We can do better. As a country, we can do better, certainly.
But yeah. So Scott, you kind of talked about the four layers of modern mass notification systems. Do you guys want to like quickly lay those out for people who might not be familiar, and then talk about how those are evolving with technological innovation?
Sure. I'll kind of get started on it. A large part of this started from um, mass casualty events from the Department of Defense, and that's how a lot of your M&S and mass notification came about. And so one of the things that was put in place were kind of layers, where that first layer is that ability to provide intelligent communication in a live manner inside of a building. And then taking it a step further, of the second layer being outside the building and in green spaces and wide areas. The third layer of that is really where I start seeing a lot of our AV things, components coming in. And in the fourth layer is going to be, being able to get distributed messaging, being able to get that information out to people in a mass manner that's directly targeted to them, directly targeted to some sort of technology that they have. So, and then that layer 4 has always been kind of set up as, for us, tornado warnings, on the East Coast. You guys probably have the hurricane warnings, that sort of thing, where we're doing something to get that information out to the mass. But a large part of it started with audio, because let's face it, the code guys, that's all they knew. They knew audio and flashing lights, and they didn't really know audio very well. So AV really has a great opportunity in mass notification of really being able to provide a lot of what you do day to day to help the business continuity with a customer, with the digital signage packages and things that we're doing now from conference rooms, and how things can be so interactive, especially after the pandemic, where a lot of people are telecommuting, but you're getting those messages on your computer, you're getting them on your phone. That ability to be able to link together becomes integral. And it's something that I think can be leveraged to help make sure that we're getting the right information to the right people.
It's funny. I always think about, we all lived through 9/11 here in New York, and at the end of the day, the 9/11 reports talked about the lack of communication and the ability to talk over one network and to disseminate information. And we're really seeing a repeat of that in the schools. We've seen, 7, 8-year-old children dialing 911, teachers dialing 911, and to no avail. That at that point the damage is done. So it's the four layers, as Scott mentioned. That alerting. How do we alert? How do we get a message clearly across to teachers and people of that nature and within schools, and then most importantly, how do we get the message out of the building, to law enforcement and to fire and EMS, and and we're kind of repeating the sins of the past in the sense that we've seen this happen. What have we learned? The good news is we are learning and we're getting much better at it. There's there's some really great companies that are giving us the tools now to help schools and to certainly grow our business. And so we're getting there, but yeah, it's like Scott said, it's four layers. The personal and public alerting. The internal, which is the big one because that's where time is a factor.
Right.
And it's probably our weakest link right now is that internal communication. When an intruder enters the school, what happens? Not much is the problem. It's nothing.
Yeah. I have kind of a question about that because do you think it's better to quickly notify everyone internally or to wait and gather information so you can make sure that information is accurate before notifying? Like, I know that that's kind of a hard and like a philosophical question that we could answer all day. But it reminds me a little bit of the shooting that happened on UNC's campus a few months ago. And the primary concerns that we in Chapel Hill heard from the students was like they didn't tell us enough information early enough. But I think the police's response and the notification people's response to that, Alert Carolina, I think they were like, well, we wanted to make sure that we were giving accurate information before. You know what I mean?
There's a good case study actually in St. Louis, the Central Visual Performing Arts High School. They did lose 2 lives, but it happened in 22. They had instant non-coded alerting, and the teachers were properly trained to gather in a safe part of the room, lock doors, pull the shades down, because without visual targets, then shooters obviously will move on to the next target and look at the visual targets, and that's all about training, and so
Yeah.
we believe in what I've been taught that you've got to get notification out instantaneously, as faster the better. We've been practicing for fire drills forever, right? Since everybody who's on this phone call video has been at a fire drill since they were 5 years old. And, now there's some pushback going, are we traumatizing kids by doing that? Well, you better know where to go when an intruder enters the building, instead of saying, well, is that going to affect them? So, I believe that clear, as fast as possible announcements with people properly trained,
Right.
with teachers and faculty knowing, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go behind the cinder block wall. We're not going to go under desks, duck and cover. That's more work through stuff.
I don't know why my brain immediately went to duck and cover too.
Yeah, it's great. You just so and you're right, because it's way much. But duck and cover is not running is a great way to go, and don't run in a straight line because bullets go in straight lines.
Right.
So they're the kind of things that everyone, our children, us, we all need to be trained on. We're this is a new world we live in. But
right.
Getting there.
So kind of moving toward like compliance and implementation with different systems. So we kind of talked about when we were, emailing back and forth before this about different codes. So, there's IFC, IBC, NFPA 72. How do mass notification systems have to or adhere to these codes? And what are some of the challenges in implementing these systems in those various types of facilities?
I have something to say about this, but I know Scott has more of an expertise. So Scott, I'll let you go first, and then I have a couple small things to share about this. But why don't you go first?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and you touched on it a little bit, George, is we need to make sure that we've got a process. We need to have an appropriate process in place, just like we have with fire. If there's one thing that our fire departments did well, it was to make sure that children understood the threat of a fire without being scared of it. And what do I do to react to it? So, a large part of that is making sure that that process is in place. And when the codes have come out, there's a distinct challenge with mass notification, especially in education, of saying, hey, you need to have mass notification in your building, you know and most of our fire marshals and AHJs, they understand that to be voice evacuation, which is completely and utterly different than mass notification. And so that is about where their expertise stops. They understand that, okay, we're going to put in a voice evacuation system, but you can use it for something other than fire. That is about as far as they've gotten. And really, what we see in that is, as long as it works from a fire perspective, we're okay. But one of the things that code is clear on is that you don't necessarily need to have your fire alarm system be your end all be all for mass notification. It talks about emergency paging systems, and when we start talking about things like that, we're talking about, well, like what we had years ago. You had school intercom systems in all of your rooms that now give you that ability to be able to do that notification. So a lot emergency paging systems that we see in healthcare, these are all things that are already in place. It's really just using the technology that's there in the manner that we need to. And most authorities that I work with, George, I think you probably have similar. I know New York is a lot different because they made significant changes to how they want to have their notification done, for obvious reasons. But for the most part, HJs are engaging in understanding, okay, what is it you want to do with it? And how do we help? Instead of, um, it has to be this way, the code says this, so just do it this way because I don't know anything different. And so, for a lot of integrators and manufacturers that are out there talking about mass notification, really helping educate them on what's out there and what's available, because they are willing to listen to what is being said, and they're willing to let that go because they do recognize that the fire threat is not as serious as other threats, especially in schools. And so, how we go about that, really kind of bringing them on board early on, is a really, really effective way to be able to do it. And, from an AV standpoint, that expertise is out there with those AV integrators and those manufacturers. They understand audiovisual, they understand on what clear, intelligible voice messaging is. From a code perspective, they had to write an addendum to teach fire people what sound was, to be brutally honest. So, you do have that unique aspect because you already have that expertise out there. And so, engaging in the fire marshals, especially early on, to help them understand, this is what we're trying to do, this is what we're trying to promote. And more times than not, they're more than happy to work with, the school or the hospital or whatever, facility it is, just to make sure that they're getting the appropriate threat definition in there. But it does all kind of come back to making sure you've got a plan. You've got an emergency operations plan, you've got a procedure, you've got a process in place. That's a very, very strong goal for them.
I have a couple of perspectives that I look at, and the fire department. Interestingly enough, 10% of all the fire calls in the country, only 10% are actually fire calls, and 90% are medical. So that's the first thing to understand. The second thing about evacuate at a fire, it's totally the right idea, right? If you evacuate in a school, you present targets. So evacuation is not the answer. It just puts targets in hallways. So the thinking of fire and life safety I believe, needs to be separated from this, because there's two different rescue and safety missions there. Hence why the technology of visual and voice communication is so critical. It's the only thing that can mass communicate to everyone. Um, it's funny. We put our teachers in a tough spot. Vice principal, the physical education teacher, the math teacher. We now ask them to do really what law enforcement jobs, and that's not fair either, right? That they have to take that role. So, I think in this case is where technology really helps them. Okay, they
Yeah.
understand, they get a clear message. Okay, here's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Great, let's do it. And because every shooting that we've had, and we've had hundreds, unfortunately, the teachers are just lost. They just, they're scrambling.
Right.
And the other thing, all the school shootings, how many school fires have you heard of where children were lost? None. So, yeah, I don't think fire plays a big role. The processes and procedures around fire, I don't think they play a role in this part of what we're trying to achieve. And, so.
Yeah. Yeah, y'all both made really good points. So earlier we kind of talked about like a few buzzwords in AV right now, and one of those was AI, of course. Another buzzword that's been around for a few years is interoperability, and how important that is within the industry. So, given the challenges that are out there when it comes to standardizing mass notification systems across like different regions, different buildings, what strategies can be employed to kind of achieve that effective communication and interoperability within these systems? Sorry, that was like a mouthful.
Well, I think we're all very dependent on the network, right? And I think in this case, the network is our friend, right? We have to use the network. I think the question bears, how do we back up the network? If a shooter is intelligent and cuts the power or does something, right? How are we supporting backup systems? Do we have copper and fiber backup in and out of the buildings? We have to harden all the networks when it comes to life safety like this. And listen, networks are very, very strong, right? You don't hear networks going down a whole lot, but in this case, they need to be hardened. And 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 again, all of our AV equipment obviously plays very well on the network, right? We've all become IT AV people, and so interoperability is not the issue. It's more of a different mindset of now how is this AV going to operate on the network? And I think that's the transition point. If your video over the network goes down, okay, fine, we'll get it back up. But if your communication to the outside world goes down, well, then that's a much bigger deal, right? So I think that's part of it there.
Yeah, I'd like to add too, I think there's a shift that we are beginning to see, especially in schools. But that interoperability means some sort of standardization. I think you've seen a lot of times especially in your audio visual, we see it all the time still in fire alarm. Fire alarm's a fire alarm. Doesn't matter if you've got 4 different manufacturers across your network. Doesn't matter. They all do the same thing. Well, that's not necessarily the case now, because when we are looking at trying to be able to go to that next layer of just not only the people that are in that building, but what's happening throughout that district or throughout that area. And so with that interoperability comes some kind of standardization. What kind of standard protocols are we going to use from an IP perspective if we're doing voice over IP, and how, as Georgian mentioned, that survivability. That's probably the biggest issue I have from a life safety standpoint is, IP technology was made to have collisions. It's not made to survive. That's the way it was built. So that with networking becoming, pretty much it's a way of life. We need it. Georgia made the great comment. You're almost have more issues if you can't connect to the outside world than if something doesn't work inside your building, because everything is so cloud-based and relied upon communication outside that building. So making sure that, that interoperability is available, but that survivability. What are we doing as kind of a backup plan? UPS has now become a lot more important. How do we supervise or see what's happening with a lot of that AV equipment. Like, do we know the TV's off that we're also going to use to do visual signage in case of an emergency? Those are the type of things that become important, and we have the tools to do those. But a lot of times that's the type of things that aren't discussed until after the fact. And Steph, you kind of made the comment of, well, Chapel Hill, they had a process. Now they're probably going to revamp that process. But that being said, a large part of that is you have to be able to have the process, practice the process, and make sure that it's happening. So with that interoperability, you have some of those challenges. So making sure that it's the survivability is there, as well as one thing that we don't do very well in AV is making sure we're routinely testing the systems. Making sure that they're running.
Yeah, we test fire alarms, right? And the fire department rolls out to a school or whatever. But the only time law enforcement interacts with the school is if there's an actual emergency. So why are we not testing our law enforcement with the schools? And what does that look like? So I think all of that's important. And then what about that communication? What is the police department, the sheriff's office, whoever covering, do they know how they're going to react to a school? We've seen, tremendous failure in Texas, right? And then we've seen some successes. St. Louis, it saved a lot of lives. So, that's what needs to be practiced, right? We're all geared up for fires. We're not geared up for life safety in this case.
Yeah, we had a comment that came in from an audience member. So Nate says, the more that AV system manufacturers and integrators support common alerting protocol, the more interoperability we'll have.
Yeah.
So
kind of like Apple and Microsoft.
That's a good one. So it kind of shifting here, but you kind of led me right into this question. So when we Scott, you were talking about UNC and that feedback from the people who experienced it. How do mass notification systems incorporate user feedback and interaction so that they can ensure timely, effective communication during those emergencies when they do happen?
Yeah, I think that's where our big challenge is, especially when we get kind of into those layer 3 and layer 4 type aspects. Because everyone is so connected that a lot of your information can be just disjointed. And, we've seen it just in some events, in the Midwest with bad tornadic events where everybody's trying to use their cell phone to get information. Well, the cell tower's gone. You're not getting any information. And so that's one of the challenges that, we see, and especially embracing on that AV side, some way for especially in schools, how do our classrooms communicate back to a central location? If we are going into an active threat situation, is our room okay? Or do we have a medical emergency? That being able to provide some of that feedback, so that can happen, as well as when you're looking at some of your mass notification solutions, how do those things, like when you do mass messaging, how do we know that it actually hit the device? Do we know that they read it? Those kind of things, as well as where can they provide feedback or get up-to-date information. So, a lot of our schools, we've discussed from that social media aspect is they've got a completely different, I'll call it Twitter, I think it's X now, but, a completely different feed for emergency type communication. That's the one that you should be looking for and following. A completely different website where you can get information, as well as provide to provide updates or ask for what might be happening. Because in that critical scenario, one of the things that I think we need to do a better job in the industry, as well as law enforcement does, as well as the process is happening. I think a large part of it is that when a fire alarm goes off, we know, just like George said, from little kids, the big red truck comes up with the lights flashing. We know that's what happened. you know, a lot of it is just not knowing what that process is, knowing that law enforcement is on their way, knowing this is happening, and being able to have, especially from the social media aspect, that ability to have a good, complete process that gives you that information. This is what's going on. Here's where it's happening. This is what the next steps are. This is what to do to be safe, so that they know, okay, it's there, the process is moving, the process is working. And that helps a lot, you know, other than from the aspect of, and we do have it, you know, when you're having those active threats, you know, I had it when my kids were in school, get a text message saying, Dad, there's a bomb threat outside. What do I do? You know, well, I've already got a Twitter alert. You know, it also helps that I know law enforcement. So in my aspect,
Yeah.
but to know, okay, hey, there's a process in place. This is what they're asking you to do. That's why you should be doing it. And really, you know, that's a component that I think we can work on as an industry, is how are we getting that feedback back to a central location, you know, and being able to provide that information so that we can be able to get the information as we're responding to the threat, as well as being able to actively send out information of here's what's happening now. I think the average is, from what some of the studies were from the shootings, were if we can give information between 8 to 12 minutes, that would satisfy most people. So giving an update, even if that update is, this is still ongoing, you know, law enforcement is reacting to the threat, here's what the current situation is, just so that people can know that something is going on and happening.
I think one of the questions we have to ask ourselves are we surveying faculty, law enforcement to say, how did that go, right? We had a drill. How did it go? Well, it didn't really go well at all. Here's why. Or, you know, that worked very well. And then start to build on those successes. And, you know, I don't think we do that. And again, so Scott said, back to the fire, right? We all know what to do. Fire alarm goes off. I'm going to get out of my desk, going to go outside. Pretty straightforward. So how do we get our children to learn just like we've been taught? And, you know, it's not that same reaction, but they need to be taught how to react. So I think surveys are probably missed on both sides. I think they would be very helpful to this, you know, to the whole world, and for us, because as we put technology in, and you come to realize that, gee, you know, here's a perfect audio visual, right? We set PA systems up to X level, audio level. Well, now there's 100 kids and gunfire. So is that level still valid?
Right.
Probably not, right? It's no longer clear. I can't hear it. There's gunfire. There's yelling, screaming. You know, and these are things that, you know, we have to look at. It's different, right? And this is where we, as technician, you know, technical people, can help, right? Know that we need active type speakers and levels that vary based on the environments. And, you know, I think we play a really important role in really helping these schools. And I think our industry has the technology. I don't think we've all figured out how to quite apply it. I think, you know, some of us have and some haven't. But again, back to the standards, right? There are no standards. And that's really a problem, right? Every fire alarm is exactly the same, like Scott said. It's one's ABC, one's, you know, whatever brand, but they all got that strobe and they all got that speaker and they're all red. And, you know, so I think that's a place for our industry to mature to, and we will get there, you know, as time goes on.
Yeah.
There are a lot of, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
You know, I think there are a lot of organizations out there that are trying. You know, I know, you know, PAST has done a pretty good job of trying to set some standards up that we've actually had NFPA adopt, which is helpful. You know, I Love You Guys does a lot of good work, you know, as well as Safe and Sound Schools. But George is right, is, you know, a large part of what we have is we need kind of a standards body that's going to help drive that. And, you know, our industry as integrators, as manufacturers in the AV market space, you know, we're the ones that should be helping drive that, because we are the experts of it, on what it is and how those things can happen. You know, visual has now become more important than it ever was. As we said, we know the tornado siren, we know the fire alarm, but an active threat, it depends on the information, whether you should be evacuating or whether you should be locking down, whatever your protocol is going to be, depending on how the situation is set up. And so making sure that we have more visual indication, I think, is a big role. And George, you're right in that aspect. NFPA says third-party visual devices are acceptable. Thanks, appreciate the standard there. So there's a lot of work we still have to do on that. But
Yeah.
kind of what you had said, George, we haven't lost a kid to fire since, well, it's just over 50 years now. And one of the things that I'll tell everybody is, you need to keep pushing and pushing for the standards, but it takes time. So it took over 50 years before a code said you should put a fire alarm system in a school, period. So it does take time, but we can be on the forefront to help drive that change.
Definitely agreed. I liked that you mentioned surveys. That's a very IT way of thinking, because one thing about the IT department, they're going to send out a survey about like, how well is this working for you? And I kind of, I get where, this is kind of a little more high stakes than just the average, IT survey about one process or another. But I think that standards are born almost out of this feedback and knowing how well things go, as well as drills, because this is the only way that we're gonna not lose kids in the future, is if they're drilled on this, they know what to do, and there's clear communication about like what they should do and what type of emergency. But kind of moving on kind of toward that, do you have any like good, examples of how mass notification systems have been effectively used in different situations recently, whether they're emergency or, sometimes not, mass notification systems are occasionally used for things other than emergencies, just for, information that an entire body or an entire organization might need. What lessons maybe were learned in these instances?
Yeah, Scott.
Okay. Yeah, I think, one of the things that I'm definitely seeing in it is more of an adoption of its kind of business continuity, just like you said, Steph. So, mass notification systems, for instance, for testing, well, we always do announcements at the beginning of the day. Those type of things to help drive that moving forward. Some of the successes that I've seen just in the Midwest area, we had a situation in Olathe, Kansas not too long ago. And part of being able to have that district-wide mass notification is all of the schools knew what was going on. All of them had gone into various stages of their solution for an active threat, as well as the community was informed on what was going on, where not to go, where to get information, and so those are the type of things where it really works well, because everybody kind of knows what's happening. And we've had a few threats just in downtown Kansas City, and it's kind of the same thing of, we get that information out to everyone who's in that area and then broadcast it back out and just keep them informed. And and I've seen successes on where that has happened. And even there are many scenarios where you can see, especially when we're hearing, okay, well, we heard of another school shooting here. I know this may sound crass, but when I look at it and say, okay, there was one that died and two that were injured, that tells me the system worked. It tells me that there was a process in place and the system worked, because we didn't have just, the duck and cover, sitting underneath my desk. I'm old enough where we still had bomb threats on the East Coast. It's like, what am I going to do sitting underneath my desk? But that was what we were taught.
Yeah, the bomb won't see you if you're under your desk. Come on.
But we are seeing some of those successes, in seeing elementary school kids. I know I work a lot with Alice, and you know, they see a police officer in the school and they raise their hands and they scream and yell because those are our lights and sirens, and that's what we're supposed to do if we're in our room. And if not, we follow the teacher. So if the teacher runs, we run. You know, those are the type of things where you're starting to see those type of aspects happening that just tells me that's what's going to help. That's what's going to help. And when we start implementing things, as Georgia mentioned, like AI, to be more proactive, because a lot of our systems are reactive. Even fire's reactive. Let's face it. It doesn't go off until the fire started.
Right.
So, you know, being able to put forth more of those preventative type things and making sure we're drilling those, that we are actively testing that we are actively doing drills to see what happens and get that feedback on how well it is. You know, those are the type of things that I'm starting to see of once we kind of get over of we don't want to traumatize our kids. Well, there's a way, you know, and I'm an old fire guy. You know, we all understood what a fire drill was. And it's going to take time because this is a change. You know, it's a change that we didn't have to deal with in our generation, you know, that these generations are now going through. But if we can start that and start it early, you know, that's where I'm seeing the change happen. Because not only are kids feeling safer from the reports that I'm getting, but they feel empowered. And I think that's a huge thing to look at from that standpoint is by having the right processes in place and helping them understand the technology that's in use to keep them safe and what they do when they get the information from that technology. That's what actually is being successful.
I think what's great about the new generations of children is that they're technology savvy, right? Unlike myself
Mhm.
at that age. And you know, the fact is they just get it and they
Right.
understand it and know how to react to it. And so it's not a big sell, I don't think, on the children's side, you know, but it's pretty interesting. This is such an upside, you know, the benefit. I mean, listen, we've all installed a lot of video conferencing bars, and you know, we haven't made the world that much better a place. But you know, this is really an opportunity for this industry to really do good and to really help, you know, help mankind in a sense. And so it's kind of nice. I mean, I look at it from that point of view. You know, I haven't saved anybody's life by putting a video bar in your conference room, but in this case, I actually could do something positive, and that's how I look at this and why, you know, I'm enthusiastic about it. You know, and excited to, you know, get up in the morning and see who I can help or how I can help.
Yeah. It's a good way of looking at it. So we kind of almost touched on this, but you know, when we're looking at how AI can work with these systems, a big question that comes up is security, privacy, all of these things. So these are pretty paramount. They're only going to become more paramount and more talked about. So how is this need for this mass notification system being very accurate and almost, you know, developing in technology to the point where it can catch an emergency before it even happens? How can this balance with the need for protection of individual privacy? Which is a big question that no one can really give an answer to. But here you guys go. Try.
Well, I look back and I thought about this question a lot. You know, when you asked us to be prepared for this, and I'll just say I'll say the word COVID because we're all tired of hearing COVID. But you know,
Yeah.
when COVID happened, we gave up our HIPAA regulations. We threw them right out the window. We went and stuck our arms out and gave up our IDs and everything in without hesitation. Um, I think in this case, this is a reason to say, given a balance between privacy and life, I think it's okay. You know, I think you got to say, hey, you know what? I'm on an AI camera. It recognizes me. Fine. You know, plus I don't think we have much privacy left in this world anyway. Truth be told, especially after COVID. So, what are you afraid of? That, you know, first of all, if you're a teacher, you're a teacher. You're not going to care if you're on a camera or not, or if you're a student. It's, you know, that information should be held very close to the vest between law enforcement and schools, right? So for me, and not only an opinion, I don't see how one can make the argument for privacy, and you don't want your child on camera. Okay, then we can't protect your child from a shooter, you know. Um, so that's how I look at it, And I'm sure there's probably many opposing feelings to that, but I would put my child on a camera in lieu of his life, right? So.
Yeah, I think, from the privacy standpoint, a large part of it is we in the industry just trying to help educate. What does it actually mean? What are we doing with that data? Because I think that's where a big issue comes in, is everybody's
Right.
concerned of you're taking all of this data. And, I kind of look at it. I'm not that generation, but I've noticed more and more people are. They put their phone or they put their thumb on their phone to unlock it. They just look at their phone to unlock it. FYI, all the stuff I'm going to go look for, you already just put on the network. You already put in the web. And so, on the most unsecured device known to man.
Yeah.
So, I think a large part of it is educating that, because I think the concern now comes down to is, okay, we are doing it. We're looking at algorithms for unappropriate behavior, if you will.
Hmm.
And I think that's where that concern comes in, is now are we going to be targeted? Are we going to be targeted because of what we look like, because of how we act, because of what we're wearing? I think is a large part of the concern that's out there, in making sure that, the public does understand that a lot of that use is simply to be able to look at what are some of the potential threats that are going to be there. And
Hmm.
we talk about AI with for weapons detection, recognizing that, yeah, we're looking for weapons, and it gets better and better every day. We need that metadata so that we're not pulling your kid over who has a metal Yeti water bottle, which was huge when we first started doing AI with weapons detection, because,
Right.
well, it looks like a knife, looks like a big knife. That's what AI thought, so looking from that privacy aspect, I think George, said it well, is a lot of our stuff is already out there, and I understand the standpoint of, in the school, having the concern, but that's why there are FERPA laws that are out there. But let's face it, if your kids went to the store, if they went to the movies, any of the information that we're gathering for security purposes, it's already out there.
Hmm. And I think like a lot of the problems with this type of recognition technology is that people had a lot of concern about like the human biases that were very much being built into this technology, but we're getting better at implementing this and developing this as we go. So, I'm thinking that the more we get into this, like the more we're going to be able to develop this so that it doesn't necessarily pick out people who look a certain way or are dressed a certain way. And it's going to have a little bit more of intelligent ways of picking out where threats are.
Agreed. Yeah, I think it's looking for body motions, punching, wrestling and guns and stuff. And yes, and after that, once that's intelligence is in, then it doesn't matter that I wear a hat or a jacket or shorts, or it doesn't matter. It's not
Yeah.
not what we're looking for. We're looking for specifics. As we
And
all
it,
know, AI is learning fast.
Yeah.
and
Almost
it,
faster than, yeah, go ahead, Scott. Sorry.
it's moving more from just that video realm to the audio realm as well. A lot of the AI engines that I really enjoy seeing from the video aspect is it's also incorporating audio. So it is looking for the gunshot type detection. We're
Mhm.
looking for audio aggression. It's looking for a certain type of decibel level. It's looking for certain types of frequency of voice modulation. Those are the type of things that we're narrowing in on, not necessarily like George said, I'm wearing a hoodie, and carrying a large backpack.
Mhm.
Those are not the type of things that we're looking for, from the AI
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah. Good point. So this is kind of a question that no one ever wants to be faced with, but I think it's important that we at least touch on it a little bit. So, what happens when your mass notification system fails? And how important is it to set up backups? And, like, what do you do when that does fail? What's the next step?
Well, listen, redundant, in this case, redundant switches and stuff are critical, right? I said, I think I mentioned it before, does that school have copper and fiber, what we call north and south, so if, there's, something gets cut,
Mhm.
the shooter's smart enough to know how to take a network down, what's the backup to that? And I think you have to have backups. It's what we learned in 9/11, right? We realized that, the police precincts particularly did not have redundant communications. So they were pretty much all out of touch, right? There's 156 police stations in New York City, and they became out of touch at 9:30 in the morning. And, that now was fixed. Verizon came in and said, okay, we've got a plan. Here's how we're going to back up communications. And I think that has to be the consideration here. It's, yeah, the digital signage is important. Yeah, the voice and everything else. But okay, now what? What do we do? Right? Tornado, power goes out, no networks, right? How do you get the message out? So I think it has to. I think when we as an industry go into that sales mode, there's parties that have to be at that table, like IT, the Verizons of the world. They have to come to the table and be a part of those communications, conversations right from the get-go, because they play an important part. Listen, at the end of the day, Verizon is the last mile. So that one cable coming out of your school is the last mile. I would like to have them in the conversation, you know, because it doesn't matter how good a camera and microphones I installed, it all goes there. And so I think the conversation is critical, you know, to make that right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think looking at it, from a closed network standpoint, if you will, when you're talking about mass notifications. So, making sure that the switches and that sort of thing that's going to be used for your mass notification, making sure that those are backed up, making sure that they're not being shared with other resources. So that, while we want to be Internet of Everything, that's good, but physically being able to secure that hardware in a way where we can back it up and that your threats for malware and other types of things that may take it down are significantly reduced. And as George had said, one of the things the cell companies have done now is prioritizing what goes through the cell towers, and so making sure that when you're doing that mass messaging, that wide open, that you're using that band. How do you get in touch to be able to use that band?
Right.
I know, here in the Kansas City metro area, certain frequency bands have been set up for the cellular network that's dedicated to emergency management. And schools can take part of that, so they can use that so that there is that backup that's there. So being able to back up and harden, at the building level, as well as what do we have to make sure that we've got a secondary form of being able to communicate outside of the building becomes important.
I think having those conversations early on with the telecom providers, with police, is our mass notification system going directly to the police department or law
Yeah.
enforcement? What does that look like?
Right.
Because dialing 911 is not helpful in the sense that there's 2 minutes of lost time there, and 2 minutes is a world of time. If you're in a school and you hear gunshots, 2 minutes is forever. And so how is that law enforcement being brought into the conversation
Yeah.
and talked about technology and stuff? And I think that's the key to our success, is bringing the parties together and then talking about a system that works. And I think we have all the tools. I don't
Mhm.
think we, truly have the process down yet, but it's new. It's new to us. It's new to everybody. So again, like Scott said, we're learning. We're like kids, right? Every day we learn something new. So I think we'll have a lot to learn here. And again, standards would be wonderful. They'll come eventually. And I think that'd be hugely helpful, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, and that's one of those things standard wise where I think we're starting to see it kind of mix, with our emergency responder communication systems. And a lot of that stemmed from coming out of New York of, how do we make sure that our first responders can communicate with each other no matter where they are in the building. But with that comes the ability for that it can also be your backup for your mass notification, that there's a transmission um, infrastructure that can be used that I think a lot of our facilities, as George had said, they don't realize it's there. Well, that's just for law enforcement. Well, no, not actually. It's not. It can be used as an emergency backup for your radio system as well. So being able to, as George said, having those conversations, I think that the biggest step is making sure you have a process, and it's okay to not know, to not know what you don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but recognizing of, okay, what can we do as we look at building this building or retrofitting this building? What do we think we need to do, and what's out there? And as George said, getting partners into the conversation earlier. I never consulted with architects when they were building the building. I always did it after the fact for security. Fire, yes, because, well, you had to make sure it was in there. And now more and more, we're looking at, let's start with that up front, because we need to know where this information is going to go and how is it going to be used and what is the customer's expectations. Because that's where you see that greatest failure is when something happens and something doesn't work, and then everybody goes back and go, why didn't we think about that? So having that conversation earlier rather than later ends up being one of the ways that helps make sure it's successful.
One of the things that I don't see any questions, I can't see them, but I'm surprised no one has brought up, the budget. It's usually something that comes up early in these conversations. Well, the schools don't have budgets, and just so everyone knows, there's funds out there. It was the CARES Act. Now it's called ESSER, ESSER. There are tens of millions of dollars. If you start to look in your state and then look for the individual towns, you'll be shocked, because we did that here in the Northeast, and to see these little towns with 900 students having $2 million, $5 million, and this is that money that can be spent on this. And I don't even think the schools are quite aware of how the money can be used.
Right.
And that's another part of our industry is, that's where the salesperson becomes an asset, is to say, hey, you've got $2.5
Did
million.
you know that this money's available? Yeah.
And no, we didn't know that. We thought it was for new bathrooms. Okay, well, it is, but there's more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, the budgets are there, which is something that we don't get to say in our industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's always, in this case, yeah, we have the money. They just don't know they have the money. So
Yeah.
it's part of that educational process as well.
Well, I know we just have a couple more minutes here, but I know we could literally talk about this all day, probably for a few days. But unfortunately, we just had an hour for this launch and learn. So I wanted to just take the time to thank you both so much for being on this panel. I have had a really good time, and it's also been really informative for me to hear both of your experiences. And I know it has been for our audience as well. So I'm just going to ask for our audience if they want to connect with you, continue the conversation after this. George, where can they find you?
Conferencetechnologies.inc, the .com, and George Meglio on LinkedIn. So pretty easy to find.
Scott, what about you?
Definitely on LinkedIn under Scott Lord, and you can go to the pastk12.org website, and all of my contact information is there as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much again for being on this Launch and Learn. It has been tremendously helpful, I think, to everyone who has been watching in the industry and for me. And once again, I wanted to shout out to Mimo Monitors. Thank you so much for hosting this Launch and Learn as well. And don't forget to go to rAVe Pubs and launch code for all of your industry news. And to thank you to our audience members for watching today. And make sure to watch out for any more Launch and Learns coming up. We're sure to do plenty more on security. But keep an eye out on lavnch.com. I'm Steph Beckett, and thank you guys once again.